Hello, and welcome to some Dodge family history. This is where I present information and research on my ancestors who served in the military during the early 20th century. Today, I will be presenting on the military service of Sergeant David Nemetzky, Medical Department, from April of 1917 through his honorable discharge in August of 1919. We will use records that are available online, such as the bi-monthly muster rolls on Family Search and morning reports on Fold 3, as well as available National Archives records from St. Louis, such as the General Court-Martial records, to tell the story of this chapter of his military service. This revised presentation also includes information found at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland in 2025, such as Surgeon General's office correspondence, special orders, and bi-monthly medical department rosters. At the time of the United States entry into World War I on April 6, 1917, Sergeant David Nemetzky was stationed at Base Hospital No. 5 in Nogales, Arizona. Unlike his previous enlistments, which were for 3 years each, it appears that this enlistment was a 7-year enlistment, as he was not discharged in April 1917 following 3 years of service. Sergeant Nemetzky was transferred back to the Presidio of San Francisco on April 24, 1917. He arrived there 2 days later on April 26th and was part of the Medical Department Casual Detachment. On May 10th, orders were issued and he was assigned back to duty at the Presidio of San Francisco. His second assignment at the Presidio of San Francisco would be different from his first assignment, not only because he was now a non-commissioned officer, but also because of the enlisted personnel whom he would be responsible for. Two months after his assignment back to the Presidio of San Francisco, on July 10, 1917, he was promoted to Sergeant First Class, what would be considered Staff Sergeant today. Promotion to Sergeant First Class required a time requirement of 1 year in the rank of Sergeant prior to promotion. Normally, a promotion would also require a qualifying examination, but because of World War I and the need for non-commissioned officers was great, these requirements were suspended, and the promotion was granted on an emergency basis. Among his responsibilities at the Presidio was being in charge of the post-hospital mess. During the summer and fall of 1917, the mess for the medical department increased from 200 men to 400 men, and there were 2 kitchens for the medical department mess. He was in charge of both kitchens and responsible for purchasing the food for the mess, as well as keeping the books for the mess, including inventory and accounting. No doubt his training and experience as a cook served him well during this time. During the summer and fall of 1917, he was solely responsible for the mess, and his chain of command was straight to his organization commander. Because of this simple chain of command, he was able to work out contracts and broker deals with a number of the wholesale food dealers in San Francisco, which allowed him to provide top quality food, meat, and produce for the hospital mess. However, during the fall of 1917, the conditions, environment, and personnel of the mess he was responsible would change, but not for the better. Among those who were under Sergeant First Class Nemetzky were the following who enlisted in the Army during 1917. Private First Class August Bernardowski. He enlisted in June of 1917 and was assigned to the Presidio from Vancouver Barracks, Washington. He would be discharged in January of 1919, having spent his entire enlistment at the Presidio. He would go with Sergeant First Class Nemetzky to purchase food for the post-hospital mess. Cook Vuna Smith. He enlisted in July of 1917 and was also assigned to the Presidio. He was a cook under the command of Sergeant First Class Nemetzky. In February of 1918, he would be promoted to the rank of sergeant and later accept a commission as second lieutenant in the Sanitary Corps. Cook William George Stahl. He enlisted at Fort Douglas, Utah in January of 1917 and was also a cook under the command of Sergeant First Class Nemetzky. He served until his discharge in June of 1920 from the Regular Army Reserve as a sergeant. Private Guy Risley. He enlisted in June of 1917 and was also assigned to the Presidio of San Francisco. He was discharged in December of 1918 as a private first class. In addition to these enlistees, there were two other non-commissioned officers that were also assigned to the post-hospital mess to work under the direction of Sergeant First Class Nemetzky, Sergeant Earl Kalb, who enlisted in February of 1914 and had previously served in the hospital corps assigned to the Philippine Islands. He had returned to the States in August of 1917 and was assigned to the Presidio. He would become a career soldier serving in the medical department. His final discharge came in 1930. Sergeant First Class Charles W. Adamson, who had also enlisted in 1914 and served in the Philippine Islands prior to his assignment at the Presidio in August of 1917. Sergeant Adamson quickly climbed the ranks, attaining the rank of Sergeant First Class in November of 1917, just 2 months after his promotion to sergeant. He was a subordinate NCO to Sergeant First Class Nemetzky. He was responsible for the hospital mess bookkeeping. Sergeant Adamson had a reputation of causing problems and had previously lost his rank of sergeant while stationed in the Philippines in 1916. Throughout 1917, while on his daily route to purchase food for the hospital mess, Sergeant Nemetzky would also stop by the residence of one Mrs. Lillian Wagaman of 2903 Baker Street to drop off groceries that he would pick up for her. She would order her groceries from some of the local food dealers, pay the bill, and ask him to pick up her groceries for her. Sergeant Nemetzky had done this for a number of months without a thought, as it was on his route to purchase food for the hospital mess, and it came to be a part of his routine. He even purchased a turkey for her during Christmas of 1917 and paid for it out of his own pocket as a gift to her. By this time, however, Private Bernardowski and Cook Smith informed him that he was being watched and that accusations had started that he was selling food purchased for the hospital mess to Mrs. Wagaman. In January of 1918, knowing the accusations of misappropriation of Army property being leveled against him, Sergeant Nemetzky openly took 10 pounds of butter from the mess kitchen, tied it up in a package as if to give the impression to those who were watching him that he was either going to sell the butter or otherwise abscond with it for his own personal benefit, placed it in the vehicle he used for his daily purchases, and left the Presidio. Later that day, he returned the entire amount of butter back to the hospital mess. It was this action, done so openly, that caused him to be arrested on January 23, 1918, and placed in confinement at the Presidio guardhouse, where he would be held until he faced trial by general court-martial. The general court-martial was held on February 21, 1918. Sergeant Nemetzky was charged with a total of 5 counts of misappropriation of government property, specifically misappropriation of a turkey, butter, and eggs for his own benefit and use. While he had faced a general court-martial twice before for his own misactions, this court-martial would prove to have been brought about by those under his command, some of whom were seemingly naive and simply following the lead of those around them, while others who were responsible for bringing this court-martial about appeared to have been motivated by an unfounded animosity against Sergeant First Class Nemetzky. The first witness for the prosecution was Mrs. Lillian Wagaman of 2903 Baker Street. Right away, it was clear that no military property had been appropriated. When asked about meat that he brought to her, she stated, "Well, he used to come. He used to get my meat for me, get my order, and bring my meat for me." Regarding a turkey he had bought her, she stated, "I was to pay for the turkey and then he made a gift present of it." Regarding the eggs, she stated that he got them from my egg man. I called and told him that there would be a man out to get the eggs, and then she paid her egg man for them. When pressed by the prosecution regarding payment for the food items, she stated that she did not pay Sergeant Nemetzky for any of the items and that there was no indication it was food that he had purchased for military use. The court went so far as to warn the prosecution to not impeach the testimony of their own witness, as what she testified to took away from the credibility of the charges against Sergeant Nemetzky. The next witness for the prosecution was Captain Arthur Brown, the investigating officer who had recommended the charges against Sergeant Nemetzky. Captain Brown testified that he, Sergeant Adamson, and Private Bernardowski had interviewed Mrs. Wagaman regarding the items she had received from Sergeant Nemetzky. While it was clear that the items in question were purchased by her and delivered to her, and were not taken from the food purchased for the hospital mess, it also appears from his testimony that he was influenced by Sergeant Charles Adamson, Cook Vuna Smith, Cook William Stahl, and Private August Bernardowski. Sergeant Adamson was the next to testify. In addition to relating his recollection of the interview with Mrs. Wagaman, Sergeant Adamson admitted that he was not particularly friendly with Sergeant Nemetzky. The defense took this opportunity to show prejudice against Sergeant Nemetzky by Sergeant Adamson by having him recount an exchange stating to Sergeant Nemetzky that he thought the mess was in poor shape. Sergeant Nemetzky, according to Sergeant Adamson, told him that his opinion of the mess was a personal matter. He also related an altercation they had had around the same time while playing cards. He accused Sergeant Nemetzky of playing with marked cards, which accusation Sergeant Nemetzky denied. He also acknowledged that Sergeant Nemetzky was his superior NCO during his entire time at the Presidio. Private August Bernardowski was next on the stand. He was also involved in the interview with Mrs. Wagaman and claimed that while driving with Sergeant Nemetzky, that money exchanged hands each time he brought food to Mrs. Wagaman. He testified, falsely, that Mrs. Wagaman had him weigh the turkey that was brought over to her. He also falsely testified that Sergeant Nemetzky delivered 30 pounds of butter, intended for use in the mess, to Mrs. Wagaman. When pressed by the defense regarding the delivery of the butter, he was unable to provide additional details and repeated what appears to have been a scripted testimony. Following him was Cook Vuna Smith. Cook Smith was also unable to give clarity to the details of the dates and times that Sergeant Nemetzky was supposed to have taken food from the mess and delivered it to Mrs. Wagaman. Following him was Cook William Stahl, who was just as clumsy in his testimony, as he was unable to keep straight pertinent details, such as dates and the number and quantity of items taken from the mess. Private Guy Risley was next. He testified that Sergeant Nemetzky had, on 2 different occasions, taken cases of eggs from the mess kitchen for personal delivery to Mrs. Wagaman. None of the details that each witness provided matched what the others had testified to. The defense then presented their case. They started with the testimony of one A. W. Baker of 131 13th Street, who sold eggs to Mrs. Wagaman. While he admitted to not knowing Sergeant Nemetzky personally, he did acknowledge that she paid for her own eggs. Next for the defense was Frank Smith McCullough, a wholesale produce seller. He knew Sergeant Nemetzky and started doing business with him as a mess sergeant in August of 1917. He, along with his foreman Charles Arnold, both testified that Sergeant Nemetzky came in to purchase several turkeys for the hospital mess, in addition to a personal turkey for himself. They both explained that the turkeys for the hospital mess were paid for separately from the personal turkey he purchased and gifted to Mrs. Wagaman. Next to testify was Joseph Moyes, a wholesale fruit and produce seller. He testified that all his transactions with Sergeant Nemetzky were strictly for the hospital mess. Following him was Edward James Convey, a meat seller. He testified that in addition to selling him meat for the hospital mess, Sergeant Nemetzky would on occasion purchase small quantities of meat which he would pay for right then and there. He stated that Sergeant Nemetzky was a man who possessed the most beautiful honesty, the highest type of such. Finally, Sergeant Earl A. Kalp was called to testify. His testimony was brief, and he stated that he knew of the troubles between Sergeants Nemetzky and Adamson. Sergeant Kalp stated that he was good friends with Sergeant Nemetzky and did not have any problems with him. Now it was Sergeant Nemetzky's turn to testify. He stated, "I was exclusively in charge of both kitchens, under the sole supervision of my organization commander. I also did all the bookwork pertaining thereto. I was accountable only, as I stated, to my organization commander. Therefore, I was able to give better service to the government as I had nobody to interfere with my duties at that time. Up to about September or October, I had no trouble with the administration of my kitchen or kitchens, as the fact may have been at the time. And during that time, I knew the way they acted towards me. They thought I had performed excellent service and therefore knew I was able to run the mess by myself and just be under their supervision. Later on, towards October and November, Sergeant First Class Adamson came to the post, and he got the job of organization clerk. It was but, I will say, 2 or 3 weeks after that I had noticed a very distinct agitation and grumbling going on among the men. I had a reason to know that because I was amongst them all the time. At that time I noticed that agitation going on, so I asked what all the cause was of all the trouble, and I was told by a number of them about this clerk, that when they would come in the office and ask anything at all pertaining to their wants, they would be ill-treated in every way. I had the occasion to feel his manners and ways of doing business with me, because he interfered with my duties time and again. He would come in the kitchen and interfere with the cooks, and interfere with the kitchen police. I had 4 cooks and about 4 kitchen police in each kitchen at the time, and I would admonish him time and again, and tell him to mind his own affairs, and if there was anything wrong, tell it to the first sergeant, and it would be properly attended to. Following his statement, he testified on his own behalf and refuted all that he had been accused of. He continued and explained that every item of every purchase he made for the hospital mess was delivered accordingly, and that he withheld no purchased food from the Army. He refuted the accusations that Mrs. Wagaman had paid him for any of the food he delivered to her. He also made the accusation that Sergeant Adamson was behind the problems that had come up within the hospital mess, and that he had caused those cooks and privates to testify against him. Following the conclusion of Sergeant Nemetzky's testimony, the court was closed and he was found not guilty of all the charges. Following his acquittal, he was released from confinement and returned to duty the next day. Following the acquittal, he was also admonished of the perniciousness of mixing private transactions with military business. Such practices are objectionable and should not be tolerated or indulged in by those in the service. Those investigating the case were also admonished. The voluminous record in this case, with its findings of not guilty, emphasizes the necessity for careful investigation before charges are proffered and the cost in time and money of a trial incurred. It is important to note that the word groceries was never used in describing what Sergeant Nemetzky brought over to Mrs. Wagaman. Had this word been used, it would have clarified the circumstances and given clarity to the understanding that he did not take any food intended for the hospital mess for personal use. On March 6, 1918, Sergeant Nemetzky was transferred to Vancouver Barracks, Washington. While there, on June 19, 1918, he was promoted to the rank of hospital sergeant. This promotion normally required the soldier to be in rank 12 months before being promoted. However, because of World War I, this requirement was waived. His stay at Vancouver Barracks was short, as he returned to San Francisco in September of 1918, this time being stationed at Letterman General Hospital, which was a different facility than the Presidio Post Hospital. On October 5, 1918, the commander of Letterman General Hospital wrote to the Surgeon General, recommending that Sergeant Nemetzky, as well as a number of other non-commissioned officers, be transferred from Letterman to other posts, in order to allow for promotions of privates and privates first class who were qualified and deserving of promotion, as well as touting the qualifications of the non-commissioned officers that were proposed for transfer. The Surgeon General's office agreed, and he was transferred to Base Hospital 162 at Camp Lewis, Washington on November 6th. On December 23, 1918, Base Hospital 162 was demobilized, as the war had ended and troops were returning back home, and he was assigned to the USA Base Hospital at Camp Lewis. On January 8, 1919, Hospital Sergeant Nemetzky was granted leave. While on leave, he was promoted to Master Hospital Sergeant, with the date of promotion being effective December 16, 1918. When his leave was ended on February 5, 1919, he received orders to report to the port of embarkation at Hoboken, New Jersey. According to the morning reports for Base Hospital at Camp Lewis, notice of this order of transfer was not received until February 15th, and he was erroneously listed as going AWOL. Following reporting from leave at Hoboken, he was assigned to the Post Hospital, Army Supply Base, Brooklyn, New York, on February 10, 1919. After nearly 3 years, after his request to be transferred back to New York was denied, he was back home. While there, the Post Hospital issued orders that put him in charge of evacuating patients and the hospital building in the event of an emergency. On May 17, 1919, the Post Hospital was demobilized, and he was assigned to USA Embarkation Hospital No. 4 in New York City. While there, he requested furlough to the regular Army Reserves. His request was granted, and on June 13, 1919, Sergeant Nemetzky was furloughed to the regular Army Reserve, as he had been on active duty since his enlistment more than 5 years earlier in April of 1914. In August of 1919, he requested to be discharged from the regular Army Reserves so that he could re-enlist in the Army. His request was approved, and he received an honorable discharge on August 27, 1919. I hope you have enjoyed this presentation and found it informative. His service during World War I, while serving stateside, was definitely tumultuous, as he faced a general court-martial under false charges. However, he was able to defend himself and be exonerated, and continue serving in the Army, attaining the rank of Master Hospital Sergeant and receiving an honorable discharge. As for Sergeant Adamson, the subordinate NCO behind the false charges, he also attained the rank of Master Hospital Sergeant before facing a general court-martial of his own in March of 1919 for fraud and insubordination. Sergeant Adamson was found guilty, reduced to the rank of private, and confined at hard labor for 2 months. The next presentation will look at Sergeant Nemetzky's reenlistment and continued military service in the Army Medical Department from 1919 to his honorable discharge and transfer back overseas in 1924. Thank you.